community. Troy Snyder here. Hope you're well today. Just coming to you with another topic that I run into often when it comes to sex addiction work and betrayal trauma and the healing process. And one of the things I want to talk about is empathy for the addict, learning to experience empathy themselves, but also learn to be empathetic to others, along with the spouse needing and experiencing empathy from their partner. And so I think it's important just to kind of go through some basic education on what empathy is, based on a lot of the research that's out there. You can look this up yourself, and there's plenty of information out there. And I would encourage, if you're trying to learn to be an empathetic responder and engager, do some research, read through some examples. Those are always very helpful. But the first thing is you just need to be educated on what empathy is. And empathy involves understanding others' perspectives, emotions, and feelings. That's the primary concept of empathy, stepping in and being in somebody else's shoes. We also need to model empathetic behavior. You know, people can look for it when you're out there in the community. Looking where you're seeing a mom being empathetic to their child, or a dad to a child, or an employee to another employee. Look for those models of empathetic behavior. Another key ingredient in empathy, it starts with the active listening, right? The active listening is listening with your ears, right? I say that God created us in this way. He's gave us two ears and one mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you speak. But the active listening is learning to give full attention to the speaker and acknowledge their feelings, reflect back to them what they've said, shows that you understand. Um, and so an example would be if I said, you know, I had lost a grandparent a couple years ago, and a reflective response would be, so I hear you lost a grandparent a few years ago, right? I'm reflecting back to them. Um, but the person didn't say any emotion. So I could also maybe go a little further and say, I heard you lost a grandparent a couple years ago. That must have really been difficult. Or did that hurt? Was that sad? You know, you can kind of go there, and that's helpful as well in active listening. Um, Also, you can encourage individuals to imagine themselves in someone else's situation. This can involve role playing and exercising, right? We can learn to practice that. So when you're with counseling, or when you're with a friend, or whatever, you can begin to practice the exercises of that. The other thing is nonverbals. If I were sitting here talking to you and I were just very monotone and looking like this and not really engaging and looking around or using my hands, there would be some nonverbals there. You would probably go, What's going on?" His face, his eyes, his voice is telling me something. I don't know what that something is, but I'm at least acknowledging it, and then begin to inquire and ask. You can begin to make some assumptions like I'm sad or overwhelmed or scared or something, but you just want to look for those nonverbals, the body language, the voice, how you engage. And so that begins to tell you something. So for instance, if I'm trying to talk to one of my kids, and I recognize that they're, you know, kind of looking down, and maybe they're a little kind of quiet, I'm recognizing, okay, something's going on. Are they scared? Are they frustrated? Are they anxious? And then we can talk about that before we get into whatever the topic is. So I can recognize that and stop and be empathetic to them. The Another key ingredient is encouraging curiosity, right? Encouraging individuals to ask those questions and seek understanding. Curiosity is so important. So don't assume. Be curious. Ask, how are you feeling? What does that feel like when you lose a grandparent, or you get a good grade in class, right? We can be empathetic on the positive side. Like, I'm going to rejoice with you. Scripture says, rejoice with those who rejoice. So I'm going to be empathetic in that regard. So encourage that curiosity and be willing to be that. Also, another key piece is almost probably should come more closer to the top is being develop an emotional awareness. I love the feelings wheel. You can look at that and begin to understand what feelings and what categories they go in and begin to broaden your definition. The other fun thing I try to do sometimes is, I try to look at the emojis on the phone or whatnot and try to look at the faces and try to figure out what's that emotion? What's the one tier versus the two tiers or, what's going on? And so you start to develop your awareness of those social emotions. And sometimes I tell couples, hey, send your spouse throughout the day or one time during the day, just kind of like how you're feeling, with an emoji, and that can help develop some conversation as well. Um, Cultivate compassion, right? This is being towards, when Jesus saw the rich young ruler, it says that he had compassion towards him. He understood the circumstances. He understood that he was rich and he was a young and a ruler, but he also knew that what he was seeking was salvation. And what Jesus said to him is, go sell all your things, right? So Jesus had compassion on him before he even told him any of that. He kind of understood the situation. And that's something we can do as well, is like, God, help me to be a compassionate person. Help me to see that person and what's going on with them in order to really try to show that empathy, right? Positive feedback, encouraging people is another good skill with empathy. The positive reinforcement of, boy, thank you for sharing that. That was really helpful. That gives me a better understanding of you. That was really good. That was hard to share, right? Especially when they're sharing hard things or when they share exciting things. You're like, thanks for inviting me in. Thanks for sharing that with me. That is really helpful. And then empathy is one of those things that needs to be practiced. Again, find a friend, find a spouse. I know we're talking about sexual addiction and betrayed spouse, but you can find people to practice those empathy skills with, and be patient when you're developing empathy. It's a process. You know, a lot of people learn this through their training and upbringing as a child, and we also have some people that are more kind of personality towards empathy over others. But it's a skill that God tells us to have, and then so we can learn it. But it does take time to build those skills. And so I hope that these little tips are just helpful to think about. I would encourage you, go online, look for empathy and empathy practices and empathy examples, lots of movie clips and lots of, written examples of these around, positive empathy to positive emotion and negative empathy. But what we're talking about regarding the sex addict and the betrayed spouse is that oftentimes the sex addict didn't really have people being empathetic with them, not understanding their feelings. And partly that's because maybe the addict's not sharing their feelings because it's maybe not safe, but since they didn't do that, they don't know how to be empathetic in that regard. So they need to practice that. But then also, if they don't know how, then it's hard to be empathetic to my spouse. And so this is a really good skill that is super important for repair of the relationship. But it's also just important life skill for us because you can really deepen the relationships and you can grow and you can work through things. The old saying is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Well, that's empathy. I'm here with you. I hear you. I'm connecting. I'm not saying I know everything and all of your experience, but I'm trying to connect and be with you. And that shows to that person that you care. And then you can have a conversation. I can just tell you this little note is that guys oftentimes struggle with this because we are more oriented towards project and fixing things. And so when we hear a problem, we just hear what the problem is and we don't hear the emotion or the connection behind it. And we're just say things like, well, why don't you just go talk to that person? Or why don't you just go call your mother and fix that? Or, instead of going, wait a minute, wow, you must be overwhelmed by that. You must be feeling sad about this. And so I think it's important for us to know as guys that this is an area that we really need to work on and practice. So I hope thinking about empathy and starting to train yourself to grow in that will really bless you and help you, especially in the healing process.